right, go ahead and get everything set up here. Welcome everyone to Understanding the Basics of ADA Compliance for Agritourism Operations. My name is Audrey Thompson. I'm a staff attorney here with the Penn State Center for Agricultural and Shale Law. Next slide, please. The Understanding Agricultural Law educational series is a course designed to provide subject matter literacy and competence on fundamental issues of agricultural law to attorneys and business advisors who work with or represent agricultural or rural clients, but who may not specialize in agricultural law. This series is sponsored by the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's Ag Business Development Center, established through the 2019 Pennsylvania Farm Bill. The Agricultural Business Development Center aims to enhance the long-term vitality of Pennsylvania farms by supporting farm transitions, both from generation to generation and from conventional to organic farming, supporting beginning farmers, providing risk management education, and providing financial assistance through grants and low-interest loans. Next slide, please. We have covered numerous topics under the Understanding Agricultural Law education program, including ag labor, ag finance, conservation programs, Pennsylvania's Clean and Green, Clean Water Act, many, many more. This is just a cursory listing here. You can find materials and recordings from all of those programs on our Understanding Ag Law landing page on our website at aglaw.psu.edu. Next slide. Perfect. We encourage you to mark your calendars and register for our upcoming programs. Under this series, we've got Understanding the Basics of Foreign Agricultural Land Ownership Laws on August 22nd. That will be a Friday at noon. And just in 2 weeks, we should have all of our fall and winter programming lined up here. So we'll have more information on that. Next slide. Then under our quarterly dairy legal webinar series, our next date for that is going to be Tuesday, October 24th. Registration will be available soon there. That'll be noon Eastern time. That's a Tuesday, and Pennsylvania Attorney CLE is also available for that program as well. Next slide, please. We are excited to announce that we've teamed up with the Penn State Extension to offer education and services through the AgWorks program, which is funded 100% with federal funds from a U.S. Department of Labor grant totaling $1.3 million and 0% non-federal funds. This 2-year program aims to link agribusinesses to workforce services, educate workforce professionals about the needs of agribusinesses, provide services and training to individual agribusinesses based on needs, and help small agribusinesses grow and succeed. AgWorks will provide 100 registered small to medium-sized Pennsylvania farms and agribusinesses with no-cost training and consultation to ensure business sustainability in the areas of hiring and retention, business operations, compensation and benefits, legal counseling, health and safety, and PA Career Link services. Additionally, the program will register 1,000 agribusinesses in the PA Career Link online system. If you are watching this webinar and you know a PA farm that would benefit from this program, or maybe you are a Pennsylvania producer who could benefit from this program, please visit the website and share the contact information. Take and share our survey, refer ag businesses, and send referrals or questions to agworks@psu.edu. Next slide, please. And one more plug here before we get started. Registration is available for our 2025 Pennsylvania Agricultural Law Symposium. That's going to be Thursday, September 18th, here in University Park at Penn State Dickinson Law in the Katz Building. Lunch and refreshments will be provided for this 6 CLE credit event, including one ethics credit. We're still working on the schedule, but we've got a couple of topics almost hammered out. So we're looking at conflicts and ethical issues in entity formation for ag clients, USDA appeals, regulatory framework and filing and hearing issues, Pennsylvania acre and with municipal ordinances, the ag provisions of the BBB Act and Farm Bill implications, and then a 2025 ag law update. Early bird registration pricing is available until August 29th. That's $150 for attorneys requesting CLE, $100 for non-attorneys, and $25 for students. So do not delay, register today. We hope to see you on campus here at Penn State in September. And finally, just a few reminders before I turn this program over. We are recording this webinar. If you have any questions, please write them in the Q&A feature and I will collect them and ask them at the end. We encourage you to fill out the poll at the end of the webinar and tell us what you liked, where we can improve, and what topics you'd like to see in the future. And then if you are like for us to submit this program for Pennsylvania CLE, there's a CLE form listed in the chat here and also on the materials page separately. You need to fill out that form to get your credits for the CLE. Also, you must be registered for this webinar to receive CL credits. So if you're watching this with somebody else, please independently register so that we have your contact information as well. We could also send you an attendance certificate, and you can submit that to your state CLE board if you're not licensed in Pennsylvania. However, we do not guarantee out-of-state CLE credit. And as part of our responsibility to ensure attendance, we will provide a code word later in the program that you must enter into that CLE form. And I don't see anybody on the phone, so I'm not going to say that. All right, next slide. I will now turn this webinar over to Jackie Schweikler. Jackie is a staff attorney at Penn State here at the Center for Agricultural and Shale Law, where she researches numerous ag law issues, oversees student research assistance, writes the Shale Law Weekly Review, and manages Pennsylvania's agriculture mediation program. Jackie, the screen is yours.
All right, thank you, Audrey. As some of you might have noticed, tomorrow is actually July 26th, happens to be the 35th anniversary of the ADA. So this is a very timely webinar. Let's get right into it. So as the title states, our focus today will be on ADA compliance for agritourism operators relating to their guests. Please note that this is not a farm employment webinar. My focus is strictly on how to treat agritourism guests on a farm. I'm looking at this topic from the standpoint of an agritourism operator or their attorney. My goal is to provide an overview of what an agribusiness owner must do in order to be ADA compliant once they've decided to open their farm to the public. This is going to be mostly helpful to people to provide some direction for new agritourism operators and, of course, for their attorneys. And then that said, though, most of the concepts here today can be applied closely to all businesses, not just farms. So even if you're not a farmer or an ag attorney, but you're a business owner, this should be helpful to you. Please also note, there are many slides to this presentation. I promise it's not as overwhelming as it looks. I like to cite my sources, so there are quite a few slides with resources that I won't spend a lot of time on, or I might even just skip. There's a PDF on the website already, and I'm happy to send it to anyone who needs it. My hope is that you can use the PDF of the slides as a sort of road in a path to look at it later. You can share this with new farm operators, and they can use this as a reference point for getting started. With that in mind, we're going to cover a lot of topics very quickly and somewhat briefly. It's a broad overview today. We're going to look at the ADA in general, then discuss service animals on the farm, physical barriers, communication, and digital accessibility. I will also, with a very few brief slides, touch on farm employment and tax benefits. And let's get into it. Okay, so the ADA stands for Americans with Disabilities Act. If you didn't know that, now you do. I'll be saying ADA for the rest of the presentation. So what is the ADA? This is a federal law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities. I've put the full definition here on the slide, but highlighted in bold the section that applies to us here with agritourism. In short, the ADA guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunity to purchase goods and services. The ADA is extensive with 5 different titles. Title I applies to employers and relates to equal employment opportunities for businesses that employ 15 or more employees. Title II applies to government. And Title III applies to public businesses. The focus of this presentation, again, will be primarily in Title III regulations, aka ADA requirements relating to businesses for on-farm guests. When we're talking about agritourism, these are the types of businesses that I had in mind. So you-pick operations, petting zoos, farm stands, wineries, farm stays, pumpkin patches, greenhouses, things like that. This is not an exhaustive list. Most of the ADA rules we'll be covering today will apply pretty much to any business. So these are just provided to give a frame of reference for when I'm giving examples. I'll be looking at the ADA requirements from the standpoint that I'm speaking to small businesses. So keep that in mind for context, especially the section on physical barriers and structure improvements. Most of the requirements are going to be the same or similar for small businesses, but there may be some small differences in expectations. Before we get into the meat of things, I want to emphasize Title III's bottom line. Businesses must provide people with disabilities an equal opportunity to access goods or services that they offer. As we'll discuss, this is going to look very differently depending on the business and the service provided. So who does the ADA protect? The ADA protects persons with disabilities. There are 3 different types of disabilities: a person with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, The ADA also protects people who have a history of a disability. The primary example of this is cancer in remission. Lastly, the ADA protects people who are, quote, perceived by others, unquote, as having an impairment. The example here is someone with scarring from a serious injury. The ADA language is really broad, and it's meant to be inclusive of a wide variety of disabilities. My rule is, when in doubt, I would probably lean towards assuming that the disability is covered. That said, the ADA's example of something that is not a disability is a mild allergy to pollen. And then the last thing on this slide is just a note about ADA coverage. The ADA applies automatically. There's no need to sign up or register. It's the law. To wrap up our intro here, I've included this slide with a list of disabilities that are covered by the ADA. This is not an exhaustive list, of course. I just think that this list can be helpful as a starting point where, if you're planning your business, I would look through this list and think about what sort of special accommodations each person on this list might need. Also, you should note that many of these are not visible disabilities. So you might not know when you're looking at someone, but you should still have a plan in case someone, comes to you asking for an accommodation. We're going to start with service animals because this is the #1 question that I've seen for agritourism operations. So first, what is a service animal? A service animal is defined as dogs that are individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. The work or task that a dog has been trained to provide must be directly related to the person's disability. And then it should also be important to note, service animals are not considered pets by definition. And also on this slide that there are no dog breed restrictions. So even if your municipality or your local whatever has some sort of dog breed restriction, that does not apply to service animals. Now in this slide, I have some examples of the sort of tasks that a service animal might be trained to do. You might be already well aware, but dogs are amazing. It's incredible what they can do. There are seizure alert dogs that can alert people who experience seizures, sometimes before, hours before the seizure happens, which is amazing. There are diabetic alert dogs that can detect when a person's blood sugar levels drop or spike. And of course, we're familiar with, guide dogs for the blind and, dogs that help people who are deaf and help alert them to things around them. So pretty amazing what these dogs can do. These are just some examples, again, of what service dogs can do, but this is not an exhaustive list. All right, so people are often very confused about the difference between service animals and emotional support animals. Emotional support animals are not service animals. Emotional support animals are animals whose function is to provide comfort or emotional support. Service dogs are trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. Please note that this is the federal definition. The ADA does allow state and local law to define service animals more broadly. Continuing the comparison from the previous slide, with service animals, businesses must allow service animals to accompany people with disabilities in all areas of the facility where the public is allowed to go. That is direct language from the ADA, but emotional support animals are not protected by the ADA. So the bottom line, if you operate an agritourism business, you must allow service animals onto the property. You do not need to allow pets. And you usually do not need to allow emotional support animals, but double check with your state and local laws just to be sure. And I should note that you can, of course, allow other animals, but that is up to you. You can allow them if you want to, but you don't have to unless they are, of course, a service animal. So people with service animals, they have to be permitted to go wherever other members of the public are allowed to go. On this slide, I have a brainstorming question. How would you handle a service dog at a strawberry U-pick operation? So I picked this one as a brainstorming one because I think it's, I think there's multiple ways that you can address this. So in most cases, a service dog on a farm really shouldn't be too difficult. It shouldn't be too much of an issue. But this is a good brain teaser because when you have strawberries, they're on the ground. It's a sensitive crop. You don't necessarily want a dog who needs to relieving itself on your strawberry crop. So how do you address that? You have to allow the dog onto the property, of course. But how do you prevent that contamination? And of course, there's a few different ways that you can go about this. There's not an all or nothing approach. You can assist, walk with the person with a disability. And if the dog goes somewhere, maybe put a little flag there and mark that area and make sure that nobody picks any fruit from that area. You have a little like warning sign or something like that. Or maybe, you talk to the person with the disability and they just say, oh no, my dog's actually very trained and won't go in the strawberry patch if I indicate that it shouldn't do that. I don't know. You can have the conversation, have a plan. This is just something where you can spend a little bit of time thinking about it and come up with a solution that works for your property. Okay, so when can a service animal be prohibited from your property? Service animals can be excluded by a business if the dog's presence would fundamentally alter the nature of the goods, services, programs, or activities provided to the public. The example that the ADA provides is an operating room. And they're really strict on this. I haven't seen a lot of examples of where it can be prohibited except for operating rooms. So unless you are operating a surgical center or something like that at your pumpkin patch, this probably does not apply to you. This case from 2018 is a good recent example of this rule requiring businesses to allow service animals. In this case, the school did not allow a child to bring their service dog to school. The service dog was trained to alert when the child was going to have an epileptic seizure, and the school claimed that it would be too much of a distraction. The court held in favor of the student, of course, and more specifically, they held in favor of the student's parents. It's a great read if you're interested in learning more. Okay, so what do you do when you have people on your property with dog allergies or people on your property with cynophobia who are afraid of dogs? Unfortunately, the answer isn't easy. You as the business owner must figure out a way to accommodate both parties. So this is one of the situations where things might actually be easier for you as an agritourism operator than it would be for a typical storefront business. Most agritourism operations that I've been to are, they're open, they're outdoors, you've got some acreage. It's usually it shouldn't be too hard, I would imagine, to redirect the person with the dog and the person who has the allergies, keep them away from each other, right? You've got the room, you've got space for that. But if you don't, or if you just don't, you're not sure how to do that, you might have to come up with a unique solution. Maybe you have you kind of alert staff members, and staff members help redirect. The person in the blue shirt and the person in the pink shirt should not interact. Okay, great. And they just sort of make sure that they are in different locations. Maybe there's a different way to approach it. I mean, there's probably a ton of different ways that you can work on this, and probably a little bit more efficient. But this is just an idea. The point here is that you are responsible for maintaining the safety and well-being of both of your guests. And just a quick note on this slide for anyone who might offer food on the farm. If you are concerned about allowing dogs into food service areas, because you might have been warned at some point that you can't have pets in food service areas, the ADA specifically allows service animals to be in food establishments, even if there's a state or local health code that prohibits animals. So service animals are allowed in the food areas. Okay, when it comes to charges and fees, just remember that service animals are not pets. So if you usually allow people to bring pets, but let's say that you charge a $10 fee or something like that, you can't charge that same $10 fee to someone who has a service animal. Their service animal is not a pet. Think of service animals as a disability device. You wouldn't charge someone money for bringing their cane or their wheelchair or their walker with them. That wouldn't make any sense. As far as damages go, though, if your business would typically charge a customer who damages goods, then you may charge for damage caused by a service animal if that happens. But think carefully about this one and make sure that your current policy is clear. So if someone were to drop something and break some glass at your on-farm market, do you usually charge for that? Do you have a sign that says you break it, you buy it? Do you have a policy posted on your website, on your Facebook page? And if that's something that you do and you consistently enforce, okay, then if a service animal breaks something, then yes, you can ask the owner to compensate you for the damage. But if you don't have a policy and you don't advertise it and you don't enforce a policy that charges customers for accidental damage, then you cannot charge an owner for accidental damage from their service animal. Now, to redirect the narrative a little bit, let's talk for a second about the obligations of the people who use service animals. Service animals must be under control of their handler at all times. The service animal should be on a leash or tethered in some way. If the service animal can't be leashed because it would interfere with their task performance, then the service animal must still be under control either by voice signal or other control by the handler. Moving back to the business owner's obligations, I want to highlight some things that you may not ask your customer. Staff cannot ask about the person's disability. You cannot require medical documentation. Staff cannot require a special identification card or training documentation for the dog. Staff cannot ask that the dog demonstrate its ability to perform the work or task. Staff are also not allowed to ask for proof that the animal is certified, trained, or licensed. You shouldn't be interrogating your customers. I hope most of these are pretty obvious. These are very kind of personal questions. We aren't asking people who come to our business personal questions. And this statement gets its own slide because it's extremely important. There are no specific training or certification requirements for service animals. This is a common misconception. Most service animals have expensive and extensive specialized training that they complete in order to do what they do. But there are many different training programs, and people with service animals are not required to do a specific training or acquire any sort of certificate. So you can't ask for that because they might not have one. Now, over the next couple of slides, we're going to get to the practicality of what you can do when someone brings a service animal to your business. For the sake of this example, I'm going to assume that the business in question has a no pet policy. So if you allow pets on your property, this might not apply to you quite as much. So first, how should I address individuals who bring dogs to my agritourism operation? First question, is there an obvious disability? If the person with the dog is obviously disabled, then assume that the animal is a service animal. Some examples of obvious disabilities, a blind person with a seeing eye dog, an animal assisting person in a wheelchair. Animals can be trained to do all kinds of things, but if you see an animal assisting a person in a wheelchair, that is an obvious disability. If the person is obviously disabled, staff may not ask anything. All you can do is say, hello, welcome, come on in this way. Is there anything that we can do to help you? Let us know. Okay, so if the disability is not obvious, what can staff ask when trying to determine if they have a service animal versus a pet? You get two questions. First question, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? 2, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? If the person answers yes to the first question, you may not need to ask the second question, but asking the second question might help you better understand what sort of accommodations the person may need, if any. For example, if the person says the dog is trained to alert its handler when their blood sugar drops, you might know, oh, okay, this person might need to know where we keep our sugared drinks and then snacks and things like that. And so this is a good opportunity for you to let the customer know that you're available to assist them and say, hey, thank you for telling me that. Just in case you need it, we've got some sugar drinks in this fridge in that corner of the barn. If you need it, just one of our staff will run and get that for you. So this is an opportunity for, better customer service. Okay, so step number 2. If the individual answers no or nothing to these questions, then the dog is not a service animal within the definition of the ADA. If the animal is not a service animal, staff may tell them that your operation has a no pet policy, and you may ask them to leave. And again, obviously, if you don't have a no pet policy and you allow pets, this is not for you. Now, if the individual says that their animal is an emotional support animal in ESA, and they have a letter and everything, that's fine, but the staff may tell them that there is a no pet policy without exceptions for emotional support animals and ask them to leave. Now, if you have a no pet policy, that should be made very clear. It should be posted conspicuously on your website, on your social media sites, and on signs around your business. It shouldn't be a surprise when they show up and like, oh, I didn't know. Make it very clear ahead of time. And just to confirm, if the person says that their dog is a service animal, staff, of course, should permit them to enter the business. Got a little quiz here for everyone watching. I'm not going to give you time to answer it, but on this slide, I have a picture of a person who's got holding on to a dog's leash. We see this person approach our business with their dog. What questions can we ask them? This is a trick question. The answer is none. This person in the picture, and you can kind of see it behind the dog there, this person is holding a mobility cane, a cane for the blind. So in this situation, their disability is obvious. Service animals are not required to wear special vests or anything like that. The key thing is whether the disability is obvious, not whether the dog is obvious. Now, in this picture, if the person wasn't holding the mobility cane, could we then, ask our 2 questions? Yeah, We can ask her 2 questions. And as a reminder, those 2 questions are, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? And 2, what work or task has the dog been trained to perform? Now for the big question. When can a service animal be removed from a business? There are 2 conditions under which the ADA allows business to ask a service dog to be removed. If the dog is out of control and the handler does not take effective action to control it. And 2, if the dog is not housebroken. So what does it mean when an animal is out of control? There's not really a straight answer to that. It kind of depends on the situation. There are a few factors: uncontrollable barking, growling, lunging, and biting. Every situation is different, and if the service animal is provoked, then it won't be considered out of control. Now, we can all envision what an out of control dog looks like. So let's talk about some examples instead of what this is not. A dog is not out of control if it barks once or twice. That's just the dog thing. It's fine. A dog is not out of control if it lunges towards, a barn cat that kind of runs at it and runs away. Assuming that the dog is immediately brought back to heel by the handler, a dog is not out of control. A dog is not out of control if it growls briefly when a stranger reaches down to pet the dog against the wishes of the handler. And again, we shouldn't have to tell you this, but these are working dogs. We should not pet service dogs, not without the express permission of the handler. Now, the hard question here is, what happens if the dog has an accident? Importantly, I should also note that the handler is responsible for cleaning up after their dog. So if there is an accident, that's going to be something that the handler has to deal with. Now, in this situation, if the dog is a male dog and it decides to mark its territory repeatedly in the market store, that dog probably wouldn't be considered housebroken. But what if it's just one singular accident? We don't have a hard rule in this, so I can't tell you what to do, but it's going to be situational. So you have to look at the moment, see what's happening. Okay, so if it is clear that the service animal is out of control, staff may ask the person to remove the service animal from the farm. If you do this, you must allow the person to come back onto the property without the service animal. If they can't leave their service animal, but they want to make a purchase, you have to help facilitate that transaction. For example, let's say that they agree to take their service animal back to their vehicle, but the person still, you have an apple orchard or something, and they want to buy some apples from your store, but they can't navigate the path without their service animal. So you would need to accommodate them. You might, help lead them to wherever they need to go to buy the apples, or maybe they tell you what kind of they're going to purchase, and you bring them some Honeycrisp to their car, if that's what they would rather do. So you still have to let them make their purchase, come back onto the property, but you are allowed to exclude their dog at that point. Okay, let's move on from dogs. And next up, we're going to briefly talk about miniature horses. So what about miniature horses? These are fun. This is a section in the ADA that includes miniature horses as a reasonable modification. The primary focus here should be on the words reasonable modification. They are not the same as service dogs and don't receive the same level of deference, but they can be accommodated with reasonable modification. And if they can be accommodated with reasonable modification, then the business has to allow them to enter and has to permit them onto the property. If they can be accommodated, for the most part, all the rules pertaining to service dogs will apply here. For example, in the same way that you can't charge a guest for bringing their service dog to your farm, you can't charge a guest for bringing their miniature horse. On this slide, I have some factors that can be considered when deciding whether you must permit a miniature horse onto your property. You can consider the type, the size, the weight of the miniature horse, whether the handler has sufficient control, whether the miniature horse is housebroken, whether the presence in a specific facility would compromise the legitimate safety requirements that are necessary for safe operation. So again, this is, if you can make the miniature horse thing work, great. You are required to accommodate them. But if for some reason this is impossible for you and your business, like the service dog, you can deny them. But if I think for a farm, especially, that's going to be very difficult. I think it'd be difficult to argue that on your farm you can't accommodate a horse. So again, I don't know if this is going to be something that I think on a farm it's a little easier to accommodate horses. We'll just say that. Okay, Let's move on to structures, pathways, and physical barriers. So as a business owner, you must remove architectural barriers in existing facilities when it is readily achievable to do so. The ADA defines readily achievable as easily accomplishable without much difficulty or expense. This is an extremely subjective standard. Think about how this would apply to you, yourself, your farm. As a farmer, you're going to have a greater opportunity to make accessibility changes than you might realize. The example that I use for this is, think about two businesses that need to install a ramp to their store. One is a farm, our agritourism operation, and the other is a bookstore in a small city. Okay, if I'm going to build a ramp to my on-farm market store, I probably have a good amount of space around the building. If I'm rural and I've got some acreage, I've got room to make a ramp at a nice low-angled rise. But that bookstore in the city, they probably don't have a ton of space from the door to the sidewalk. It's going to be harder for them to make that ramp, and maybe even impossible. And then for actually constructing the ramp on the farm, I'm going to probably just do it myself. I've got a barn full of power tools, scrap pieces of wood from that fence that should work great. On the other hand, do you think that bookstore owner has power tools and construction materials laying around? Maybe, probably not, unless it's like a hobby that they have. So for our farm, this would be a barrier that is readily achievable to remove. For the bookstore, maybe that's not something that they can do. So on the other hand, what if these businesses are exploring an app that provides more accessibility to deaf people? The bookstore owner might have no problem making the app work. But what if the app requires Wi-Fi or a really good internet connection and our farm is out in the middle of nowhere? Well, we would have to try something else instead. In summary, like readily achievable barrier remover, there's not a list of exact things that you have to do. It's really what you can do. If it's something that you're able to do, you should do it. You're required to do it. But if it's something, like you just don't have internet access where you are or whatever, then you're not going to be required to do the app thing. So in summary, play to your strengths. Think about what you can do, what is available to you. On this slide, I've listed some basic examples of what readily achievable barrier removal means and could include. Again, we talked about ramps, widening a doorway, installing accessible door hardware, repositioning shelves, keeping paths clear. When in your store, just make sure you don't have, a bunch of stuff that's really hard for people to navigate around. Make sure that you have clear and open paths. Now, on the next few slides, I have some real-world examples. This slide shows Leffel Roots Apple Orchard. It's a great article about them. This family farm constructed a 1,000 square foot raised platform around dwarf apple trees. Platform is accessible by ramp and allows people in wheelchairs to easily pick apples themselves. This is not, I actually would not consider this readily achievable barrier removal. In my opinion, this farm has gone above and beyond. This is more than readily achievable barrier removal. These people they get the A++. This is a wonderful accommodation that they've created for their farm, and they've promoted it and they get great business out of it. But this is a little above and beyond, but it's a great idea if it's something that you're interested in. Now, this article is a little bit of an advertisement, so I have to note that I'm not personally familiar with this company, and I'm not recommending them. But I really like this article because it's one of the most practical, helpful things that I've seen for our purposes. This company has joined a landscaper in redoing this woman's backyard to make it more wheelchair accessible. I picked this resource because they provide specific detailed notes on not only how to create a gravel path, but also on how to select the gravel you want for your project. So if you have an agritourism operation that has extremely uneven ground and you want to create some accessible pathways and you have no idea where to start, check out this link. There's a YouTube video and everything. So it's really helpful. Another reason that I like this article was that in this photo, you can see that there is a perfectly raised garden bed. The woman in the article is an avid gardener, and with these raised garden beds, she's able to tend to her plants and access the produce. Raised garden beds are a great accessibility feature. So if you have, a property that has a strawberry you pick operation, maybe make some raised garden beds with some strawberries for people who have accessibility needs, people who, knee issues, hip issues, who have wheelchairs. So determining whether your business can make these accommodations is, again, it's really up to you. On some farms, it might be very easy to set up a few raised garden beds and to clear a path and put some gravel down. Again, focusing on the phrase readily achievable. Now on this slide, I have another real farm example from Bandy's Pumpkin Patch. This is a screenshot from their website showing a long access ramp that leads to a wooden platform that could be used by a person using a wheelchair to access their hayride. So that's pretty cool, very accessible. And this slide is also from Bandy's Pumpkin Patch website. This photo shows a poster on a tree that says sensory area, which is an excellent accessibility feature, especially for people with autism or noise sensitivities. And then for readily achievable barrier removal, this is such a great example of an easy, low-cost accommodation. Like they probably didn't have to spend very much money to set this little area aside. That's just a quiet area. There you go. Another thing I'd like to point out about Bandy's Pumpkin Patch is that their accessibility features are highlighted on their website. They do a great job marketing these features, and by highlighting these benefits, they can bring in more people. Okay, let's talk about communication. All right, so we already know that we need to accommodate people who are deaf and or blind. What might surprise some people is that as a business owner, you are also responsible for providing a sign language, oral interpreter, or video remote interpreting service if required or if needed. Now, if your business would experience a significant or undue financial burden, you may not have to provide an interpreter, but then you have to provide an effective alternative. A couple of things to note. First, most people with these type of disabilities, they travel with a friend or family member who can provide interpretation for them. So this situation doesn't really come up very often. The best example I heard recently is imagine a deaf parent who usually has their child interpret for them. But let's say that the parent has to go to the doctor's office and they need to hear from the doctor some very specific, very serious medical information. And in that situation, it might be a little inappropriate to ask their child to interpret for them. They could, at that point, ask their doctor to provide a translator, and their doctor would need to do so. Seems like an unlikely scenario on the farm. And in most cases, you can avoid having to do this by doing a little bit of homework, preparing yourself, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides. And of course, it's good to be prepared. And if you're rural, you might not have access to an interpreter. So thinking of alternative ways to effectively communicate is a really good idea. So even without an interpreter, there's so much free technology out there that with most agritourism operations, it's really hard to imagine a scenario where you would ever need to hire anyone. So, put things in writing. If you're doing any workshops on your farm where, you're showing people how to build a birdhouse, put all your instructions in writing. Have notebooks available or writing tech. They have, get a tablet with a real big, make the font real big and do voice to text. So as you're speaking to, your workshop attendees, have a tablet with maybe a Bluetooth like headphone connected to it. So the person who's deaf can see your voice as you voice to text on the tablet. There's a lot of cool things out there that you can do very easy, not too expensive, that you can set up. And then guests who are mute, you can, again, provide them with a notebook. They can write their questions down, or a tablet that they can type their questions down. Or, everyone's got a phone these days. You can just, type a question, type an answer. There's so many options available to you. Okay, so for low vision guests, make sure that all your printouts are in large, high contrast font. Make sure your signs are large, which is just really good advice for signs in general. And then guests who are blind, ask the guest if they would like a tour, a tour of the facility. If they're interested, have a staff person walk around with them. The staff person can explain the signage, describe what they're seeing, and most importantly, make sure that the blind person avoids tripping hazards. Of course, that's just one idea. Maybe you do an audio walkthrough of your agritourism business and have like an audio file that you can share with the blind guest, and they can just listen to you talk as they walk around. There's so many cool options. All right, jumping into digital accessibility. We're going to talk about your website and social media accounts. Now, this is one of those slides that we're not going to spend a lot of time on. This for any of the attorneys who are watching who are curious about technology standards in the US and want to learn a little bit more about how they came to be. If you are on the ADA website and you see something that refers to the Section 508 law, that's what this is. The Section 508 law requires federal agencies to make electronics and information technology accessible to people with disabilities. In 2017, these standards were updated to better fit changing technology. The update corresponds to standards with the World Wide Web Consortium, with which maintains the WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Now, this slide is taken verbatim from the ADA guidance document on web accessibility. The ADA does not have specific instructions for digital accessibility. The guidance document explains that the ADA stance on digital accessibility is this: digital and internet inclusivity is also required for businesses open to the public. And then the ADA also references the WCAG as a helpful guide. If you are a digital content creator or you're really into all that technical stuff, and you've created your own website from scratch, you should probably be familiar with the WCAG guidelines. Even if you're not 100% memorized them, you should be familiar with them. There's a link on this slide that will take you to their website. And this is a picture of the website. Nothing else really to say about that. Okay, so for those of us who are not web developers, this is the resource for us. The content on this slide and the next few slides is direct from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. The link, as usual, is at the bottom of the slide. So if you're not a website developer and you manage your own website and create any digital content, you need to be aware of these principles, and I'm going to go over them over the next few slides. First, make sure that your text is a significantly different color than your background. Don't use a light pink font on a light purple background. No one is going to be able to read that. Second, use text cues in addition to any sort of color direction. So if you've got a standardized form that you ask people to fill out and you say something like, do this when you see red, also use, use words to describe what people need to do. So if you put something in red to show that it's required, use the word required to make it clear to anyone who might be colorblind. Also, use text, alt text for images. Alt text or text alternatives. It's pretty commonplace now, so you might already be familiar with this, but this allows people who use screen readers, usually blind or low vision users, to hear a description of what the picture is. I want to emphasize the use of alt text because it's important and it is necessary, and it's something that people aren't necessarily familiar with yet. But if you post pictures to your website or your social media for your business, you need to include alt text. Now on this slide, I have a real world example of how to find and use alt text on Instagram. So if you have a social media account that you're promoting your business, this is how you would do it. On the first screenshot here, you go down to you make a new post, you go down to more options, you click on it. There's a thing that says accessibility, and it has, you click on that, and then you write your own alt text. Now, most people don't do this because AI usually writes the alt text for you. But the AI version of the alt text is not going to be very good. And especially if you're an agritourism operation and you're doing unique and different things, taking a picture of a pumpkin cannon or, a hayride, the alt text might say tractor in field and not, this is a hayride wagon, right? And like for my example here, instead of saying, the alt text that I included is a gorgeous golden retriever dog wearing a blue collar, sitting in front of a porch railing. There's a tree with pretty pink blossoms in the background. It's pretty accurate. Probably could have done a little bit better, but they just put like a dog in the AI. That's wrong. This is a gorgeous dog. It's my dog. So, be specific, use your own alt text. Don't rely on AI for that. It's not as good. Oh, and for anyone who's watching, yes, I included an alt text for each of these screenshots. It's a little inception there. It's fun. Next on our list, we have some online forms. Make sure your forms are labeled clearly, which, good advice for forms anyways. Make sure the text size is, your font is large and readable. Don't use weird fonts. The beauty of the internet is that you have all the room in the world to include more details. You shouldn't be using teeny tiny font. And then as for video captions, these are pretty easy to use these days too. If you're posting a video using Zoom or posting anything to YouTube, there's a one-click button that allows YouTube to auto-generate captions, and you should be using that. Now for captions, I've once again provided a personalized example. This is a screenshot of a Zoom meeting. Instead of my profile picture, I've used another great photo of my dog. And the important bit here is in the lower right-hand corner of this screen. There's a bubble with 3 little dots that says more. When you click on that, you should see an option for captions. When you click on that, there should be a couple more clicks, and then you will have enabled captions for your Zoom meeting. In an agritourism context, this is useful if you're using Zoom to do any kind of educational recordings for your farm. For any attorneys who are watching, This is useful for any client calls. And for anyone wondering, we do have captions enabled, and you can also find them in the recordings on our YouTube channel. The next two topics on this slide may be more for your digital developer. You want to pay a little bit of attention to your headings, make sure that they clearly delineate different sections. And you should also ask your web developer to make sure that the website is accessible via keyboard navigation. The last guideline I want to talk about is reporting accessibility issues. It is your responsibility to make it as easy as possible for your customers to report accessibility issues. So you want to have a plain statement on your website somewhere, but also somewhere on your farm or at your market, where you invite people to call, email, submit a form, put a little piece of paper in a bucket, whatever it is, just to let you know if they have an accessibility request. If you talk to your web developer and they're not sure where to get started to test your website, send them this link. There's a list of website evaluation tools that are pretty easy to use. I've got some of those tools as an example here on this website too. And I just want to take a quick note. If you've created your own website through something like Wix or Weebly or Squarespace, or we use WordPress for ours, and you're wondering, oh no, I've never once looked at this. It's probably fine. I would still take a second to check and look it up, but most of those websites already have the accessibility built in. So most of these things that you're wondering about, they probably already have these features. So it's probably not a huge deal, but it's not a bad idea to use some of these softwares to double check and see where you can improve. All right, next up, farm employment. Just got a couple slides on this. So Title I of the ADA applies to employers with 15 or more employees. If you are an agritourism business that employs 15 or more employees, you need to be aware of these requirements. So Title I requires that employers have to provide people with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from employment-related opportunities available to others. This definition is extremely broad and doesn't just include recruitment, hiring, and pay, but also includes social activities. I've included a link to more information at the bottom of this slide, but if you have questions, please feel free to shoot me an email and I can direct you to more resources. Accessibility in employment is a huge topic and worthy of its own presentation, and we are not covering all of it today. So talking about cost. At this point, if you're working with someone who's got a new operation, they may be very concerned about money. How am I going to pay for all of this? With a lot of these changes, it's probably going to be more time consuming than costly. I mean, depending on what you're doing. If you're starting a new business, it might be costly for the new buildings. But if you're just making some adjustments to your farm that you've had for a while, it might not be terrible. But some of these big structural changes, like I said, could carry significant costs. So there are some possible tax benefits. First, we have the Disabled Access Credit, or IRS Section 44. This is a tax credit for small businesses that have expenses from providing access to persons with disabilities. The business needs to have fewer than 30 full-time workers and have revenue less than $1 million. This tax credit is pretty broad and applies to a lot of different expenses. You can purchase visual readers, pay for sign language interpreters, pay for adaptive equipment, pay for printed materials. You can also use it to pay for some construction in case you need to move physical barriers that would otherwise limit accessibility. So it's pretty broad. Please note that this credit cannot be used for the cost of new construction. It can only be used for adaptations to existing facilities that are required to comply with the ADA. So, and then the maximum tax credit that you can get from this is $5,000. Next, we have barrier removal tax deduction, or IRS Section 190. This deduction can be taken by any business and applies to the removal of architecture or transportation barriers. And the maximum deduction here is $15,000. And great news, these two benefits can be used together. You can take a tax credit and a tax deduction as long as your expenses qualify. I have some additional details about that on the slide, but I am not a tax professional. I'm not going to pretend to understand the finer details of this. So if you have any tax questions, I will happily send you a link to the IRS page with more details. They've got some really great guidance documents on this that explain this better than I could. And this slide might seem a little out of place. This is a tax credit for employers. And even though I'm not really talking about employment today, I didn't want to neglect this tax opportunity. So if you hire people with disabilities or certain qualified veterans, you may be eligible for the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. This credit is available for employers who have this type of employee, and they've been working 400 hours or more. I have some additional details again on the slide, and more importantly, a link at the bottom for more information. The next couple slides, I'll talk about dispute resolution. While my focus today was on ADA requirements and things that you have to do as a business owner, I also think it's important to look at each situation where accessibility is requested and look at it from the point of empathy. In other words, even if you find yourself in a situation where you're not legally required to provide an accessible resolution, it might help you as a business to, try to find a compromise. All right. So if you find yourself in a dispute with a customer on your farm, consider mediation. In most states, you can request mediation through USDA's Agricultural Mediation Program. Agricultural producers, farmers, you can request mediation for all kinds of issues, anything relating to USDA, like agricultural loans or wetlands determinations. And in some states, ADA issues are covered. So I know Texas specifically has a great program for this. So if that's something that, you've run into a dispute like this, instead of going straight to court, you can ask for mediation to resolve it. With mediation, a neutral third-party mediator is hired to facilitate the resolution between the two parties. It's not a court case or anything like that, but most of the mediations through this program in most states, it's free or very low cost. And you can find your state ag mediation program on the Coalition of Ag Mediation Programs website at agriculturemediation.org. And of course, we, as Audrey mentioned at the top, we run Pennsylvania's Agricultural Mediation Program through the Ag Law Center. So if you're interested in mediation or you know someone who would benefit from that for any ADA disputes or anything like that, send them our way. We'll talk and see if they qualify for the program. Okay, just a few slides left as we wrap up. On this slide, I've created a very simple checklist for agritourism operators. Personally, I'm very checklist oriented, so I hope this is helpful to someone who likes to check the boxes as they get organized. So you're looking at your operation, check your walkways. Can they be navigated by people using walkers and wheelchairs? Are your doorways wide enough to accommodate, wheelchairs and things like that, equipment? Are you prepared to accommodate service animals? Are your bathrooms updated? Did you and your web designer follow best practices on your website? Do you have accommodations for people with hearing or visual limitations? Do you have an ADA parking space? Have you followed the parking lot rules? There's a whole page on parking lots that I wish I had time to get into. Training. Is your staff trained on this topic, especially with the questions that you can ask for people with service animals? Make sure that they know those two questions. Maybe print out, a copy of those couple of slides and have that available at the gate, something like that. On this slide, I just have some details from the 2022 census. I wanted to highlight this data in particular because I think it's important and helpful to know how many people in the U.S. have disabilities and are impacted by accessibility issues. This is just an interesting perspective. So by some estimates, 13% is considered actually very low. Other organizations estimate that people with disabilities account for closer to 20 to 25% of the U.S. population. Either way, it's a huge portion of the population and, a huge portion of the potential agritourism operation customer base. And I don't know that much about marketing, but Penn State Extension had a webinar with the Blue Trunk Foundation in it. So I wanted to bring this up because I thought it was really, really interesting. This is a great way to promote yourself. So the Blue Trunk Foundation is a website that showcases businesses that have accessibility features. So if you have implemented some sort of accessibility feature on your farm, you can register for free on the Blue Trunk Foundation, add your website there, and then people who are traveling, doing some tourism in the area can find your website, can find your information, and they know that your operation has that accessibility feature for them, which is really, really wonderful and helpful. And one other thing about marketing I wanted to note, some great advice about marketing is if someone asks you the question, is your business accessible? Yes is not the right answer. You have to be specific. Accessibility for what? Accessibility for whom? you have to be specific. So tell people exactly what you've done to make your business accessible. So for example, if you widened your pathways, that's wonderful. You might have made your business more accessible for wheelchairs, but maybe you don't have, a sensory area for people with autism or auditory needs, things like that. But if you do have that, mention that too. So list your features, market yourself, use it as a way to talk about yourself. Now, if there's something in this presentation that I didn't quite answer, or I could have done a little bit of a better job on, you have a very specific question that I'm not going to know the answer to, call the ADA directly. They have an information line. I called them a few months ago with a question when I was looking into this information, and it was very easy to chat with them, and they were very helpful. I definitely recommend them. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to learn more. I've included a ton of links in this presentation, a lot of resources throughout. But if you can only look at one resource, check out the ADA's Primer for Small Business. It covers almost everything I talked about here today. But if your main concern is service animals, you should look at the National Ag Law Center's article on the ADA and service animals for an excellent overview on the topic. If you have any other legal questions about agricultural law, check out our website for resources at aglaw.psu.edu. And on this slide, I have listed my email and office phone number. If you have any accessibility requests relating to this presentation or other presentations, please feel free to reach out via email to jks251@psu.edu, or you can call me directly at 814-865-4249. And that is it for me. Again, my name is Jackie Schweikler. My mailing address is listed on the slide here.
All right, well, I think that about does it for us today. So thanks, Jackie, so much for a great presentation. And I will say to everyone, we hope to see you next month for understanding the basics of foreign agricultural land ownership laws. And we encourage you to register now at the early bird pricing for the Agricultural Law Symposium on September 18th in person here at University Park. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and have a great weekend.